think we're ready to get started. Those of you who don't know me, my name is Craig Harris. I'm your mayor. I want to thank Jay and Becca and Rob for working on this project. This is our second meeting like this, and it's a larger turnout than the first time. The crowd keeps growing. That's good. I appreciate everyone taking time out of your busy schedules. This is about the future of Kitty Hawk. We had about 300 surveys completed. Is that right? Yeah. I wish it had been more, but that's pretty good too. So I'm thankful for that. So listen up tonight. Jay will try to answer all your questions. Someone will. And let's hope we leave here with a bright aspect of looking forward to things in our future. How about that? Thank you.
Thank you. Just to reiterate what the mayor said, thank you all for coming out tonight. Really appreciate you coming to share your thoughts and ideas. I do have kind of a brief presentation, so please forgive me that, but basically to introduce who I am and why Becca and I are here, helping the town with this land use plan update, tell you a little bit about that process and what that looks like moving through time, and then introduce you to kind of the information we've gathered so far in terms of that community survey that went out, and then tell you how that has kind of morphed its way into the draft goals that you see around you. And the draft vision, which I know we haven't gotten to yet, but I encourage you to kind of take a peek at that and think about how that might affect you. And there's actually some dots down the bottom left there, the traditional planners public engagement tool, the sticker dot. And then after that kind of presentation, I just want to give more time for question and answer, and then also have the opportunity to kind of circulate more and talk about things specifically one-on-one as opposed to a group question and answer. And just so you know, this is being recorded and broadcast, streamed on the town's YouTube channel. And we also have a project website where all this information will be posted and available to view tomorrow. So if you have neighbors or friends that weren't able to make it, or if you're watching online and want to catch up more or comment some, you can tune into the project website. It's through the town's website. You can find links in the planning department page. And there's even an little email widget if you want to just type in some thoughts there, or someone online wants to type in thoughts and hit send. Becca and I work for a company called Stewart, and the company is largely made up of construction services professionals. And then we have our group, which is the community planning group, which is housed in the transportation and planning practice area. We're a small group of dedicated land use planners. We work primarily, almost exclusively on comprehensive land use plan updates and land use plan updates. CAMA plans, like this one, is also part of, and then ordinance updates, so land development regulations. And a lot of us have worked for local government before, so we've administered codes and administered land use plans and talked to people that want to rezone their property and stuff like that. So that's kind of the perspective that we bring. And that's why we're here helping the town update their land use plan. And I'll tell you why we're doing that in just a second. But just to show you our happy faces, this is our team. And Becca is here with me tonight. She's sitting over there. So if you want to get a hold of someone else who's on the Stewart team and I happen to be busy, please feel free to grab a hold of her. We also have a notepad in the back where you can just write something down if you're thinking about it and you just want to jot it down before you head out. A comprehensive plan, a land use plan, you might call it a CAMA plan. It's a way of guiding growth and development in your community and talking about shared vision and goals. It helps leadership make decisions. For instance, the future land use map component gets used by the planning board and the council whenever they make rezoning decisions. It also touches on other topics that are important to the community. And so that's kind of what we really want to make sure that we capture here as part of this, because we want to make sure it's a community driven plan that captures kind of the shared vision and moves that and helps the community move forward in that direction. That said, it's also become recently a condition that the state has introduced into the state planning and zoning legislation that if you want to do zoning, you have to have a reasonably updated land use plan with a future land use element. And since the town of Kitty Hawk desires to keep doing zoning, we want to make sure we have that so that we can stay compliant with the state. In addition, since we're a coastal community, and I should mention here also, this plan concerns the town's planning jurisdiction, which is where it can influence the zoning, and that's the city limits. And since we are a Coastal Area Management Act community, we need to have a CAMA compliant land use plan in order to continue to issue CAMA permits. So if you ever needed a dock or some sort of a structure that interacts with saltwater or coastal wetlands, you need a CAMA permit. And so in order to do that, you have to have a land use plan that ticks certain boxes and has looked at certain factors related to land use in and around that area. And that forms a lot of the background chapters of this plan. You'll see things like a map of coastal wetlands, a map of storm surge areas, a map of sensitive habitats, submerged aquatic vegetation. You'll see maps like that that have to do with the interface between the water and the land, and some consideration of how land use, how we use land, it impacts those assets and those environmental features. And then to kind of further build on that, the Coastal Area Management Act requires that the plan touch on these 5 topic areas. And you'll see those kind of on these draft goal boards where what we've heard from the community has aligned with those topic areas. We've kind of placed them in that bucket. But then you'll also see kind of in the latter goals, and there's no hierarchy, they're just numbered. It's not like one's more important than the other. But you'll see in the latter goals, we have things that don't necessarily fit in those CAMA buckets and are kind of just things that are of concern to the community in terms of character and facilities and services and stuff like that that don't have to do with natural hazard areas or water quality, but are still important, and we want to make sure we have goals and recommendations to advance those concerns as well. So we started in fall, and we kind of have currently a project goal to kind of wrap up the project with adoption in fall. I probably should have added a third box in between the second and third, because we're not quite along all the way to that third box yet, but we're kind of getting to it, where we're bringing information that has been gathered so far in this process and sharing it with you as a community, and then getting feedback on that input. So when we started out in fall, we met with staff to kind of set up the meetings and when things were going to happen and talk about the project scope and how we were going to kind of accomplish that. And then we, the Stewart team, came out, met with stakeholder groups and had kind of like focus group interviews with certain people that were going to help us get more information about what's going on in town and what's kind of important and what's on the radar. We took a tour of the community, made sure we got some pictures, saw the areas that they told us about. We talked to department heads and town staff. And so then we went back to our office and we reviewed a lot of the information. We did as much of the mapping as we could. And then you saw the community survey came out, and then that was another way to gather information. And I'll review that in just a second. And so now we're bringing that information back. We've kind of digested that and crunched it into something that's starting to get towards plan text. And now we're bringing it back so that people can see that and review that and tell us what they think about it and make sure we're on the right track as we kind of do that again afterwards. So there's a more detailed project schedule on the website, and we're still kind of hashing out some of the future dates as they lay in, but you can kind of see in general, we're expecting to have another public meeting in kind of like May, June time period where we would kind of roll out the draft of the plan that we would then want to kind of get final comment on, and then make those revisions and then take that forward to the planning board and the council for their review and adoption. And so this plan is like any legislative action that the council takes. It goes through review at the planning board in a public meeting, review and comment, and then they make a recommendation to the council, and then the council hears it at a subsequent meeting and makes a decision whether to adopt it or not, or change it and adopt it, or whatever that may be. So that's kind of the process of the plan adoption. So, like I said, we've had some public engagement events already. We're kind of at that bottom bullet now. Our survey ran for a little over 1 month, starting in mid-December to mid-January. And I want to go through those kind of highlights with you right now. So in terms of one of the first questions we want to ask, not necessarily, really just to kind of get a feel for if we're reaching, who we're reaching with the survey, involved kind of a poll of how people self-identify with their interaction with the town. So you can see the majority of people who responded to the survey, there was almost 300 respondents. The majority of them live here full-time. Almost half of them own property here as well. And then various other ways of interacting, and it doesn't add up to 100 because you could have checked as many boxes as you wanted. A lot of the people live in neighborhoods along the Sound side or near the reserve or west of Kitty Hawk Road of the highway. But then you have people live in other locations as well, east of the highway and Oceanside and so forth, or are vacationers or long-term visitors. And then almost over 40% of respondents were longtime residents of 20 years or more. So that's kind of how the breakdown of the people that took the plan goes. And we actually have a board back there next to where Rebecca's sitting that kind of outlines the same information if you want to take a peek and look at it more closely. And it will be on the project website tomorrow. So then the next kind of phase of the survey was talking about how much progress have we made implementing the goals of the previous land use plan. Because we have an existing land use plan for the town. It's been around for a while. And so the question is, have we moved that ball forward down the field? How much have we? Which ones are still relevant? Which ones are not so relevant that we don't really need to worry about so much moving forward? And so you can see that, generally speaking, people who took the survey are happy with the town efforts to nourish and stabilize the dunes and the beach, but maybe made less progress finding public access opportunities to get on the Sound and the bay on the waters over there, which, there are a couple access points, but there are fewer than on the beach side. You guys have great access to the ocean, a lot of public parking areas and crossovers, but fewer opportunities on the Sound side. So that's just kind of how people felt about that. Here we asked a little bit more about aesthetics and town character. A lot of progress toward maintaining the family-oriented tourism, character, and in kind of keeping commercial development in commercially zoned areas, but possibly less progress or perceived progress with taking care of existing businesses or being aesthetically pleasing with new development. Now, I will say that, the scale up there is not 0 to 100, right? It's little progress, somewhat progress, lots of progress. And that doesn't necessarily place a value statement on these, which of these are more important. It just says that this is the perception of the people who took the survey in terms of how much progress has been made on these goals. This one related to aesthetics and town character as well. Less progress on these than the other ones. And so that's an opportunity there that we can move forward in this plan if that's still important. And then in terms of natural resources and environmental quality, pretty good progress maintaining forests and dunes and beaches, wetlands, and making sure that we protect the natural storm protection abilities of those areas. And then, possibly room for improvement on water quality in coastal wetlands and coastal waters. And some concern about, septic system impact, which I think is pretty much a concern that you see up and down kind of this stretch of oceanfront into neighboring towns as well. So then we wanted to ask people what they thought would be the most pressing concerns of the future. The affordability of housing came into play a lot. And I think we've kind of discussed the need with the steering committee and internally about distinguishing between affordable housing as in like subsidized housing or low income credit housing or so forth. Workforce housing being a different type of housing for, just kind of your general people that work here and also want to live near where they work. And then sometimes people also talk about attainable housing being like a distinction between renting and buying, essentially. So we probably need to, Becca and I and the rest of the Stewart team, probably need to make sure that we're very intentional about how we use those words in the plan if we're going to address those issues. So I think that's one thing that we'll take from this. People also, well, you can see here the ranking of people's ideas and thoughts about these as being challenges for the future. And also there was a strong mention of needing pedestrian safety, sidewalks, and bicycle infrastructure in certain locations around town. Starting, I think, with the main highway, the bypass, and then working out from there. In terms of providing resiliency to the changing environment and storms, A lot of concern about beach erosion and continuing nourishment. And you can see burying power lines and electric infrastructure, increasing vegetation and windbreaks to make sure the dunes stay built up. Top of the list, and then kind of going down from there. In terms of what people thought should be a priority for the plan, highest priority being a 5 and the lowest being a 0. Facilities for safe walking and bicycling, top of the list. And maintaining the existing relaxed coastal character. Kind of lower down on the line, commercial building appearance standards and a town center or a downtown or some gathering space. This was an open-ended question that just basically asked people what they value about the community. And we kind of turned that into a word cloud where the larger words indicate that it was something that popped up more often. More people chose that. And actually this kind of echoes what we heard during the focus group meetings where people said, you know, we really love being here, we really love it the way it is. We don't necessarily want it to change. And, you know, didn't really even have anything bad to say. Sometimes you go to a town and they, you know, have a lot, oh, we're angry about this, we're angry about that. And we really didn't encounter that. And I think you see that kind of reflected in this word bubble. And then we also want to ask people just to tell us in their own words what they saw as, you know, major issues that should be addressed in the plan and it should be moved forward. And you can kind of see a variety of answers there based on, you know, probably things you've also heard in talking to your own neighbors. So our challenge at Stewart was to kind of digest this information and take it and form it into kind of a community vision and community goals that we can then use to stand on when we make plan recommendations to get the town closer to that ideal version of its future. And so that's what we kind of have around the room tonight. And that'll be on the website, project website tomorrow. So we start with kind of a draft community vision that should hopefully encapsulate kind of an ideal version of Kitty Hawk in the future. And with this particular board, we kind of pulled out themes, 7 different themes that we kind of saw in there. And I would ask you if you get a chance to grab a set of those 3 dots and place your dots in the themes that you think are most important to the future of Kitty Hawk. And that'll help us know kind of what to prioritize when we start thinking about plan recommendations and where we kind of focus our energy in actually writing these portions of the plan. And that's, sorry that board's kind of hidden off to the side there, but I think it's fine that it is because you'll get a chance to see it now. And then kind of around the room, like I mentioned, there's boards that talk about these draft goals, and we ask that you kind of place some dots in those and let us know what you think is most important. There's also space on this vision board to tell us if you think that some words are the wrong words and maybe should be wordsmithed into something a little bit different or something with a different connotation. So anybody who's an English teacher, this is your chance to shine. Do we have any English teachers? So, you know, I'm not going to read these, but I hope that you'll, you know, they're on the boards, and I hope you'll circulate and look at those. And, you know, if you feel like you want to grab a marker and write something down, if we've missed anything that's really important, there's also on each of these boards kind of sub-goals or little sub-bullets down below that kind of give you an idea of kind of what's been batted around so far internally. And you know, with the steering committee today. And I've actually made some little markups in blue around these based on what we discussed with the steering committee earlier today. The steering committee is the planning board, and so they provided some guidance as to what they thought, how they should be shaped a little one way or the other. So for instance, if you think we need to add a bullet, now's a great time to get it on there. If you think there's one up there that you're just like, this just needs to be tossed, great. Or if we need to, you know, change something, now's a great time to let us know. Also, if you're watching this from home and you're going to get on the internet tomorrow and look at these and then provide comment on the project website, that's a great opportunity to do that. Please just be as specific as possible. Put down the draft goal number. That helps a lot, so we can go straight to what you're concerned about. That's basically the presentation. I want to make sure we leave time for group question and answer. There's a link to the planning department website where you can find a splash page about this land use plan update. And I may not have mentioned this earlier, but A land use plan, the time, what's the horizon for the land use plan? Like how long will we have it? I should have mentioned that earlier, but the answer is it varies. The CAMA statutes require that we look 30 years into the future in terms of population projections. The typical time horizon for a land use plan or a future land use component is probably about 15, 20 years. So when we do bring back a future land use map at the next meeting, it'll probably be looking about 15, 20 years out. But also it's kind of recommended as a best practice, if things are changing a lot in your community, you probably want to update your land use plan every 7 to 10 years. If things are pretty static in your community, I'm sorry, other way around. If they're changing a lot, you probably want to do every 5 to 7 years. If things are a little more static, you probably want to revisit every 7 to 10 years. And then there's some things like sea level rise and these kind of long-term things that will affect land use over the long term, where it helps to look out further than those time horizons, just in order to be prepared and decide how much risk the community is willing to tolerate in certain areas for certain facilities, because it might be different where you put your fire station versus where you let someone build a doghouse, right? Just as a wildly ridiculous example. With that, let me go ahead and stop talking, and if anyone has any comments or questions that kind of for the whole group, please raise your hand and ask them, and I'll try and address them. Yes, Mayor.
Jay, I'd just like to know, those that are here tonight, again, thank you for coming. What are your thoughts or what you just saw, the most important, such as workforce housing, infrastructure? What are your thoughts? Do you agree, disagree? Are you thinking something different or what? Anybody?
I agree.
Okay.
Workforce housing is very important, totally, as well as some of the other things, but right now, that one seems to hit close to home for everybody. Residents, businesses, huh?
Those are my top 3. Sure.
Thank you.
And one question, the previous plan, do you know the date on that, and then who delivered that, who created that?
I know it was created by the Community Planning Collaborative.
Okay.
But I don't know the date. Rob, do you know the date?
It was adopted in 2005.
Okay, adopted in 2005, previous land use plan, right? So it's been a while.
Yeah.
And that's not uncommon. A lot of communities are like that until the state passed that legislation, and then suddenly it became a lot more important. But also, Kitty Hawk has a very little space left to develop, right? And it hasn't necessarily been redeveloping at a fast pace because we're a septic, I would say septic limited community, right? There's no wastewater treatment plant, and you can't throw up a 5-story apartment complex, right? So, yes, sir.
Well, I just comment and then a question. The comment is, when your survey said, how does it compare to the last plan, which would be hard to do if you didn't know what the last plan was, so I just, for the next time around. But did anything surprise you in the responses that the town had that you would not normally see someplace else?
To your first point, we were pretty fortunate that most people that took the survey had longtime residents, 2 decades or more. So they have some perspective, I think, on how the previous plan goals have been kind of forwarded. But you do raise a good point. Not everyone's familiar with a 200-page document that lives in the planning department or with the clerk. In terms of the survey, if there were any surprises, every community is different, and I think Kitty Hawk is pretty different, even from just the towns to the north and south for several towns in either direction. And I would say it was, it's interesting to see in these different coastal communities the degree to which risk is tolerated just in terms of land use. And I think y'all are eyes wide open, but I think things are also going to change, and I don't know. I mean, try not to have any preconceptions before we poll and find out what's going on. But, the one thing I guess is kind of interesting about the survey is there was no question where one thing or 2 things were preferred and everything else fell off the map, right? There were trends, there were general trends, but it wasn't like a stark contrast where they were like, forget these other 3 things. And I think that jives pretty well with what we heard when we first visited, where people said, things are pretty much the way we like it here. And there's a reason we live here. So I guess that was something, maybe?
So as you go through and find these challenges in the survey, I don't know if you've already done it or you've been working with the planning board on it. As far as methodology, do you go back and try to dive down into figuring out what the root cause of each challenge is that drove you to these goals? So for instance, the affordable housing, did you drive to it, there's not enough real estate prices of housing is way up and it's not affordable anymore? Do you dive into that when you come up with your draft goals, or?
To some extent. So, and I'm glad you chose that as an example. So, this is a comprehensive plan, so it's going to have to be a high level, broad vision, and things that come out of comprehensive plans, some recommendations, you can't solve everything with a comp plan, but sometimes you can get closer, and sometimes you can document what's been shared or what the conditions are, and then that can lead to more analysis later through maybe a working group or some other type initiative. So for instance, I think Wake Forest just commissioned an affordable housing study and then follow-up about where to and how to locate housing. The affordability of housing is definitely something that's on people's radar across the state. Mountains to the sea, it doesn't matter. There are a few places where they are dying for people to move there, but most places I've worked so far are there's a similar concern, right? Where we are right here, and this is not going to be news to anyone, but a lot of the property is already occupied. There's not like 300 acres sitting around the corner where someone can come in and throw up 600 homes, right? And always at the beach also, there's a desire for vacation, second homes, and vacation rentals. And certainly the short-term rental, boom in short-term rentals over the last several years has certainly reduced the amount of housing supply for year-round residents, either through renting or purchasing. Or it's driven up those prices, right? And that's just a natural force of market, economics. There are things communities can do. That's one lever that affects that market, right? Another lever is, of course, wages, right? Wages, if everyone's making $1 million and everything's affordable, right? So there's a lot of different factors that go into all that, but there's definitely a lot of scarcity here. It's a long way to get to, you got to go all the way across the bridge to get to green fields and open farmland. And the demand is here on the beach side, or at least out on the island. So yeah, I mean, we're definitely thinking about it, and we kind of bring that information to the extent that we can forward, but we also bring it here. And I'm glad you brought up the affordability of housing because we discussed that earlier, pretty in depth. And one of the levers a community can pull, one of the few levers, because the state has done some hand tying when it comes down to the regulation of things that affect short-term and vacation rental housing. One of the few levers you have is you can name that, define it as a use, and then determine which zoning districts it can go in. And to some extent, short-term rentals operate as a commercial, it's like a hotel, right, to some extent. And it depends if it's a room or if it's a whole house, or there's a whole different flavors. But anyway, they do occupy it, they are use, and they shift the balance of single-family residential structures to a commercial use that takes them out of that year-round resident, which makes what's left less affordable. That said, they're also a major component of the economy here, right? And so they're like, that's a very important thing to consider as well, is like you can't just say, well, we want them all to be gone because that's not reasonable. Like they have a significant component to that. So there's a balancing act to be had there. A lot of communities like this are dealing with it. And it might involve some hard conversations after this comp plan process is over. But I think the time now to determine, in your specific example, if this is something that we want to address, or we want council to address moving forward, that's the type of time you got to come up to wherever that goal is and say, this is the most important goal to me, that we address this. And we might not find an answer tonight or before the fall, but afterwards we need to come up with some concrete actions to help kind of move the needle one way or the other. and find a balance. And sorry for that, that was a rambling answer, but it's a tough question.
You mentioned some deltas between our neighbors north and south in the characteristics of the survey. What are some examples? Just curious.
Well, I haven't surveyed Kill Devil Hills, but you know, for instance, in the composition geographic shape of Kitty Hawk, you know, you have kind of the village, and on the backside it's very residential, and then you have kind of the oceanfront, the ocean-facing communities and neighborhoods that mimic more, you know, Kill Devil Hills in terms of how they function. Southern Shores and Duck, I think, are kind of a little bit unique in that they started out as kind of resort communities, and so they have, you know, they're mostly cul-de-sac neighborhoods, or a lot more than you have here. Here you have more connected neighborhoods, and they function, you know, a lot differently than kind of this town does. So yeah, I mean, I haven't actually sat down and compared surveys between the two of them, but you know, different things pop to the surface. So like, for instance, people very pleased with how much public access there is to the ocean. People in Duck are also very pleased at how much access they have to the ocean. And they like it that way. They 95% of the lots in Duck can walk right onto the beach. 5% of them can't. And that can be frustrating, I'm sure. So, you know. Yes, ma'am.
When you say public access, okay, for those that don't live on the beach, that are here year-round, getting access to the beach in the summer is almost impossible. So in reading more public access, I would like to see it more residential public access, but then that goes into the economy question. So, Mr. Mayor, what is the town's, I'm going to ask your question, what is the town's position on that? We don't have, you talked about crosswalks, we don't have a lot of safety crosswalks to go across the street to the beach.
Which street are we talking about?
Well, to the best of my knowledge, Helga and Kitty Hawk Road, I might be wrong, I live on Harbor Bay, I'm on Kitty Hawk Bay, and I can't tell you how many times people renting strollers with little kids trying to get across to the beach. We've rented here, we want to go to the beach. Then you need to walk to the 7-Eleven. So, I mean, I like the coastal aspect, but, and I know we're doing better in trying to provide parking, but for a full-time resident, if you're not there before 8 or you go at noon when the people have gone home at lunchtime to take their children, whatever, there's not a lot of parking. I've seen recently, I believe, that some community in Nags Head is got a lot behind Jolly Rogers or something that's for their specific neighborhood. So is there any thought in setting up residential by stickers or something for the residents in Kitty Hawk?
We know that's an issue that has not come into play. That would be a nightmare, I think. But as you know, we have opened up more beach parking. We have initiated a lot more crosswalks, pedestrian crosswalks for that issue.
On the beach side, correct?
Yeah, on the beach side. And I feel your pain. I have gone to the beach myself and find nowhere to park, and had to drive to find a parking spot. I don't know how we would limit parking spots to residents only. That would be a nightmare, I think. I think we're lucky that we do have, you were just referring to Duck, but I think we're lucky that we do have beaches that are open to everyone. And that's what we like to keep. But I understand where you're coming from.
Well, just having lived here 9 years, but been coming since '59, Avalon, I mean, we stayed in Avalon and we could park at Avalon Pier. Now I think Avalon's a pay to park kind of thing. So I'm just, you know, the water quality and the depth at Kitty Hawk Bay, I wouldn't go in the water, and to put a boat in there, I think we just had to drag one out of there recently with our stuff. So,
and we are still looking for more parking spots. We've got an area we've been working on for about 2 years now that involves federal government, but they're not easy to work with. We are trying to get more parking areas because I know where you're coming from.
all right, thank you.
And let me just add to that, if I can, that it seems like the town's made a lot of great progress in kind of taking some rights away next to those access points And it might not be enough yet, but they have made progress in adding spaces, making them a little bit more formal, putting up signage, sometimes paving them. And then definitely we do have a draft goal. Not only it talks about increasing access, maybe in expanding those parking spaces, but also possibly finding access to the bay, which may not be, or the sound, which may not be on your top list, but it's also the harder one than expanding. But also, we heard loud and clear that people wanted more pedestrian and cycling facilities that are safe. And so I think that's going to work its way into a map that shows priority area 1 for installing sidewalks and crosswalks, priority area 2 once we get that, and I think that'll kind of start to knit itself into a network for that kind of access that's safer.
And can I add something to that? I'm Melody Clapton, I'm the town manager for the town. Just recently we met with NCDOT and they are starting their feasibility study for the sidewalk that would connect at, by Walmart all the way through. Now that doesn't mean that it's coming, but at least there's a little bit of progress. When they finish that feasibility study, we will know how much it will cost and then maybe we can plan accordingly.
Great, thank you.
And right now, we have been told 2025 on that, so we're trying to rush that up all we can.
That's great, thank you.
How does this all, again, I've been here for 9 years, haven't really figured out where the town ends and the county begins some days. How does this all play out with the county?
Well, right now the county doesn't really, y'all don't touch the county really. But they're obviously a partner in terms of, potential for recreation, facilities. Obviously, schools play into a factor. That's a county operation. County runs the EMS too, I believe.
And they collect our trash.
Okay, trash. So there's definitely some intergovernmental cooperation. And then furthermore, the state owns at least one big road through the middle of town too. And so when you want to do stuff in there, you got to get their permission also. And usually they're pretty willing if people will pay for it that aren't them, which is good and bad. I mean, but there's at least flexibility. So yeah, it's interwoven. Yes, sir. Sorry, I thought you had your hand up. Sorry. Okay. So sounds like maybe. I feel like that was some good information. Thank you. And we can kind of close out this portion of this. And yes, sir.
On your previous meeting that you had here, is there something that was brought up that we haven't brought up tonight that had been brought up in here that you can recall that might be beneficial to talk about?
Interesting question to ask a guy. No, not really. I mean, it's all kind of building together. And if you kind of look at the project website, you can see a lot of information we've covered previously. And it'll work. It's working its way into all this stuff. And so if you're seeing something in here that is important that's not here tonight, it's a great time to let's get it on there. Because it'll continue to build as we move forward. But like I said, we're a little bit further ahead than sometimes we are at this point in other communities. And then we have some of these sub-goals and these sub-bullets that would be things that we would like to find ways to move forward and make progress on in order to achieve that goal. And ultimately, we want any of those sub-goals and recommendations and actions to they need to all point back to a goal or to the vision and say, this is why we're doing it, is to make these things happen. Yeah, so with that, thanks again for your time, and I hope you'll stick around a little bit longer and talk to myself or Becca. If we're occupied, Rob is here. Melody might also be available. And you know the mayor already, so, and also please tell your neighbors and friends to check out the project website and review anything they're interested in, say anything if they want us to hear it, and be as involved as they want to be. So thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time.